All right, class. Moving on to the abdominal musculature. I'll zoom out here real quick just to give you frame of reference. So up here is our chest and pectoral muscles, and then we're going to move down to the abdominal musculature. All right. So again, we have our xiphi humerhalis that sits at the top of this. And for the abdominal musculature, we have 4 muscles that you're going to be responsible for and 1 structure. So running right down the center, should be down the center, of the abdominal cavity is the linea alba. And this is going to be divide the abdominal muscles into 2 sides. So beside the linea alba, right, and some of for this one is not very well cleaned off, but it is a band of connective tissue that runs right down the middle. It helps connect the 2 muscles that run on each side. This is the rectus abdominis. In humans, this is what most people are working on for aesthetic purposes. Cats don't have quite the definition that humans do. So the rectus abdominis, rectus is straight, so they're running straight down the abdominal cavity. Okay. Then we get some oblique fibers, and we have 2 sets of oblique fibers, the internal obliques and the external obliques. And I've dissected out the external obliques here, and you'll see that it's a fairly thin layer. All of your abdominal muscles are fairly thin. As I indicated in a previous video, I did make a small incision into the abdominal cavity, and there's really not a very thick layer of abdominal muscles. So as you're working through these, be aware of that so you're not cutting into the abdominal cavity prematurely. We will get into that once we get through the muscular system. So I've dissected this out, and you'll see that you have the top layer, the external obliques. And if you look closely, if you can see it on here, great. If not, should be able to see it in your specimen. The fibers actually are running in this direction. Okay, so a diagonal direction. As we get underneath them, and I've separated this out, I'll show you how I did that in a moment, you'll see the internal obliques. And the internal obliques are running this way. So what happens is that in order for support of the abdominal contents, we have fibers running in all directions. So we have the rectus abdominis running straight up and down. We have the external obliques running diagonally in a downward fashion. We have the internal obliques that form an X with the externals running up. And then underneath that, we have the transverse abdominis. I'm not going to identify those or show those in this particular video. We could continue to dissect this out, but the layers get very thin, and the chance of actually getting into the abdominal cavity increases as we start to look at those. We can identify those once we've opened the abdominal cavity. We'll cut right down the middle, and we'll be able to see those from underneath. But they run straight across, hence the name transverse. So in order to get to or separate out the rectus abdominis with the external oblique, what you'll see here is a fairly distinct line and change of color. So it's lighter here along the rectus abdominis, and it changes color when you get to the external oblique. So what you'll need to do is basically you're just going to, as we did with some of our other muscles, is you're just going to kind of scrape along that line. And you'll see that I have some connective tissue that's on top of that. But as you get into that, this layer will start to separate. All right. And I'm going to switch over to the scalpel because it's just a bit sharper. And I'm just going to use the tip of it. And I'm going to scrape along, and that's going to start to separate. Once it does, this will move fairly quickly. And we'll get through this. And as you get that, you can see that it actually runs all the way down here. and all the way up here. And you'll see as you separate that layer, there is that connective tissue that holds the two together. Right? There's not much of it, and it's not very thick, and it's very easy. So again, it's very cobweb-like. And once we clean that out, flip that over so I don't go too deep. Once we clean that out, they do separate fairly easily. You can just do this with your fingers. Okay, and if you look in there, you can see the direction of the fibers. All right, and we can continue that down as I've done on the other side, just sort of teasing those two things apart. All right, and that just gives you an idea of how to dissect it or draw it apart. This is going to give you an idea of how it looks. Focus here. How it looks once it is already dissected out. So, real quick, what we have, a review. We have the Linea Alba that runs right down the middle. We have the Rectus Abdominis that runs on each side. We also then have the external oblique here, the internal oblique underneath, and the deepest layer is the transverse abdominis that runs underneath, that we'll get to once we get into the abdominal cavity.